You a student?
Not exactly.
What's that?
I said not exactly, no.
What are you then?
Well, I'm just sort of traveling through.
I'd like to know who's living in my house. I'd like to know what my boys are up to.
I'm not up to much, actually. I'm just visiting. I mean, I've always wanted to see Berkeley.
You know, one of those agitators.
What?
One of those outside agitators?
Oh, no.
I hate that. I won't stand for it. I won't stand for that.
The clip you just saw is from the 1968 film The Graduate, in which a young white middle-class college graduate, Benjamin, is suspected of coming to Berkeley, California to be a student agitator by his landlord. Like many young people in the 1960s, the mere fact that he is young makes him suspect in the eyes of an adult. But the fact is that there have always been people who have been opposed to the idea of student protesters, some of whom have complained that students who participate in demonstrations are unpatriotic, crazy, and even criminal. But protesting what someone thinks is unjust and unfair is one of the bedrocks upon which our entire democracy has been built. And if it hadn't been for a few young people in the 18th century doing just that, we wouldn't be here talking about this. That's right. Alexander Hamilton was 21 years old when he fought in the Revolutionary War for independence. And James Monroe, who would later become our 5th president, was only 18. And the student protests of the 1960s were instrumental in bringing about awareness and change in civil rights, military policy, the women's movement, the gay rights movement, and the environmental movement. Students ask questions like why, if we call ourselves a democracy, are some of our citizens forced to attend separate schools just because of the color of their skin? They asked why, if we call ourselves a democracy, can we be drafted at 18 to go fight in a war thousands of miles away when we can't even vote until we're 21? And why, if we call ourselves a democracy, are women still paid less than men and denied advancement in jobs when they are just as capable? And finally, why, if we call ourselves a democracy, are we allowing corporate interests to pollute the water we drink and the air we breathe? These students believed that it was their democratic right to be heard, and that despite their age, or perhaps because of it, they were in a unique position to offer a new outlook on the world, one that could lead this country and even the world into a future where all people were treated equally. The student protest movement didn't actually start on the college campus, but in the whites-only coffee bar of a Woolworth store in Greensboro, North Carolina in February 1960. 4 black students from a local college sat down and asked to be served coffee. They were refused.
4 college freshmen, all Negroes, were refused service at a Greensboro, North Carolina lunch counter, and the civil rights sit-in was born.
The date was February 1st, 1960. The students' refusal to leave the counter launched an era of activism. The next day, 25 men and 4 women joined the sit-in. On February 5th, hundreds of students joined the protest.
Well, I covered the 1960 Greensboro, North Carolina sit-in movement. That was the one that caught fire and spread across the whole South.
television pictures of students mauled by mobs and manhandled by police stirred campus feelings from one end of the country to the other.
In 1963, Martin Luther King and civil rights leaders from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, and other civil rights groups marched in Birmingham, Alabama, a city notorious for its discriminatory practices in employment and public life, where blacks were allowed to go to many places like the fairgrounds only on colored days. Many people were arrested during these demonstrations, including Dr. King, who wrote his iconic Letter from a Birmingham Jail there. By jailing Dr. King, Birmingham, Alabama had become the center of the storm for the civil rights movement. But what turned that storm into a hurricane was when, on May 3rd, D-Day, thousands of high school students skipped school and joined the adults who had begun the march on Birmingham in what became known as the Children's Crusade. More than 600 were arrested, the youngest reportedly 8 years old.
Good morning, children. Shelley the Playboy here on WENN.
D-Day was the day, I tell you. This was the day where every student in Birmingham knew that it was going to happen.
But you gotta remember that all of the planning was a secret.
Good. Good morning, children.
The DJs would talk in code and use songs from the hit parade as signals for action.
I remember that morning I woke up with my mind on freedom.
Oh, I took special pain with putting a little starch in my blouse.
Got my toothbrush and I got the toothpaste, the soap.
Because I had a feeling that I wouldn't be coming home.
Ring, ring goes the disc jockeys pushed D-Day early in the morning, but they wouldn't even use D-Day. They used all that jive talk.
Don't forget, kids, there's gonna be a party in the park, and don't forget your toothbrushes, because luncheon will be served.
Back in the classroom, open your book. Now everybody who's listening knows what the deal is.
D-Day was the day. My mother said, okay, Gwen, don't go to that march. I mean, don't go. You go to school. I told my mother, I said, I hear you. We were raised not to lie. So I didn't tell her a lie and say I wasn't going. I said, I hear you.
We would have people picked out. Your job is to turn this fire alarm, turn that fire alarm, get the football team, basketball team, get the cheerleaders, get the band.
It was right at 11 o'clock when they arrived. They came up to the fence with a sign that just said, it's time.
When we said, let's go for the windows. And I told the others, come on, let's go. And I looked around and, all I could see was my own fanny almost, I hollered back up at those kids, but you said you were gonna go. You promised. And that's when kids started coming.
They were coming out of windows, coming out of doors.
It's so beautiful. You wouldn't believe it. Mrs. Story turned her back as we got up.
And we took it from there.
I wanted to walk out with them, but it was my job.
There was nothing you could do once the students started moving. The principal, the teachers, and everybody had to step aside.
My boyfriend tried to stop me from going, and I walked around the building, and I came right back out there and went out the gate.
You have about 2 children left in the class, maybe. Everybody's gone.
I'm sure that morning Bevel was nervous about who was going to show up.
At first there were a few, then there were hundreds, then there were thousands.
We heard that kids were coming in from all over the city. And when we heard that they were coming in from out of town, we got more excited.
And I had a cool car, They said, okay, we need you to go out to Fairfield. There's some students outside the classroom that won't go back in. Lo and behold, when I got out to Fairfield, the whole campus was outside of the building. And they all said, "We going to Birmingham."
20 kids climbed on the car, and 800 followed behind him.
I love the way you walk. I love the way you walk.
The more we walked, the more we gathered, and every once in a while you look back and you saw it was more kids coming from somewhere, from another direction. You said, where are all these kids coming from?
You had never seen that many people in your life. It's like a football game.
Kids walked as far as 18 miles to get to Birmingham in order to be arrested. And the purpose was to go to jail.
The gathering place was 16th Street Baptist Church.
Oh, we poured into 16th Street like a waterfall.
They were coming in all doors, from all directions, from the basement, from the back.
It was just like one big pep rally. Here's Park, are you in the house? Or Western, are you in the house?
And who's out here from Western High?
Children were ready. They were ready to hit the streets.
Kelly Ingram Park was the big green buffer between black Birmingham and the white downtown. 16th Street Baptist Church was on one corner, and by noon, Birmingham's finest were on the other. It was all laid out like a battlefield.
To think about it now, I get the shakes. What could have happened?
Martin Luther King spent the day at his motel, wrestling with his conscience.
A lot of people thought the kids were going to get hurt. But the reality of it was that we were born black in Alabama, and we were going to get hurt if we didn't do something.
When noon came and went without a public appearance by King, Bevel opened the floodgates. They came out in waves of 50.
The first 50 came out, he peacefully arrested them, and that does it. And the next 50 shows up, then the next 50. He go get some old paddy wagons.
They would cram the paddy wagons full of people, and then they would jam the doors shut.
Within an hour, the police had abandoned wagons and started to bring in school buses.
Fill up a bus, pull up another bus, fill it up. We arrested those kids in wholesale numbers.
Bevel timed it so that each group of 50 seemed like the last.
And what they didn't know was as the kids were going out of the front door, more kids were coming in the back door.
50. 50. So it's like, when they gonna stop?
I think when the police arrested us, they thought that we would be afraid and start to cry. They had strange looks to see that we were happy and singing and glad to be arrested.
The civil rights movement is full of other important events in which young people played a critical role. And while many lived to see some of Dr. King's dream come true, far too many perished in trying to attain it.
In the summer of 1964, Andy Goodman got training in how to register African Americans to vote as part of the growing civil rights movement in America.
People should be expected to get beaten. They should expect to spend in jail, and it may go beyond the summer when they're in jail, and that they should expect possibly somebody to get killed.
Then he traveled to Mississippi and wrote this postcard to say that he had arrived safely. "The people in this city are wonderful," he wrote, "and our reception was very good." The postmark, June 21st, 1964. That was the same day Goodman and fellow civil rights workers James Chaney and Mickey Schwerner went missing.
They were stopped by the police, accused of speeding. They were put in jail, and they were not allowed to make a phone call. And they were released at night. They got back in the car, and the Ku Klux Klan nabbed them.
For the latest on the search for the 3 missing boys,
The men's disappearance made national headlines. President Lyndon Johnson ordered federal agents to Mississippi.
I asked Hoover 2 weeks ago, after talking to the Attorney General, to fill up Mississippi with FBI men and infiltrate everything he could. What do they think happened? Think they got killed?
This morning they had absolutely no trace. There's no sign of the automobile. They have found nobody who's seen the car or the 3 people. So as far as they're concerned, they just disappeared from the face of the earth.
It wasn't until August 4th, 1964, that their bodies were found.
Thousands of law enforcement agents for 44 days were looking for my brother's body and James and Mickey. They dredged out of the swamps 9 black bodies who no one had even heard of. There's multiple levels of tragedy in this story. One of them that is most poignant for me, besides losing my brother, was that it took 2 white kids to legitimize the tragedy of being murdered if you wanted to vote.
And it took decades to achieve any kind of justice for the murders of Andy Goodman, James Chaney, and Mickey Schwerner. 18 men were arrested in 1967. Half a dozen were convicted, but only of civil rights violations. None served more than 6 years. No one was convicted of murder. Jerry Mitchell, an investigative reporter in Jackson, Mississippi, began looking at the case again in the late 80s.
Jerry Mitchell is a unique, wonderful hero. He said, "This is unfair," just like what Andy said. He found evidence and wrote about it so much that he just embarrassed the powers that be to get on it.
Thanks to Mitchell's reporting, the state reopened the case, and in 2005, Ku Klux Klan preacher Ray Edgar Killen went to trial for the killings. Killen was found guilty of manslaughter. Now 89, he is serving 60 years in prison. It was a long overdue measure of justice for the victims' families, including Andy Goodman's mother, Carolyn Goodman, herself a prominent social activist, who called for justice but opposed the death penalty.
She and my father decided the issue is to let America know that this is not about hatred. This is not about revenge. My mother was against capital punishment. She was more interested in letting people know this was her son who was murdered. He didn't do anything bad. He was living the American dream.
Stephen Smith, CBS News.
Of course, what most people think of when they think of student protest movements in the 1960s is what occurred on college campuses. 3 campuses in particular: the University of Berkeley in 1964, Columbia University in 1968, and Kent State University in 1970. Each were examples of times when, once again, student protesters played a pivotal role in effectuating change by standing up for their beliefs. The Berkeley free speech movement began over an issue that unfortunately students still confront today: the suppression of students' rights to talk to one another on campus about major political issues. In this case, students who had spent the summer working on voter registration drives in the South, like Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Michael Schwerner had done, had returned to school and set up information tables to tell other students about their experiences and the struggle for civil rights. But on September 14, 1964, only a few weeks after the fall semester had begun, Dean Catherine Towle announced that university regulations prohibited advocacy of political causes or candidates, outside public speakers, recruitment of members, and fundraising of political speakers anywhere on the university campus. And so, the tables were banned. This sparked sit-ins and demonstrations involving thousands of Berkeley students, and the arrest of student leader Mario Savio and Jack Weinberg, two of the students who had worked on voter registration in the South that summer. This is how Savio's widow, Lynn Hollander Savio, described these events.
The free speech movement was about students having the right to pass out literature, raise money, and recruit members to participate in social and political action on behalf of the causes that they believed in. So they had arrested him and brought a police car on campus to carry him away. And everybody sat down around the car. And then over the next 30 hours, the protest grew and grew, so there were several thousand people sitting around the car. And it was that event that really galvanized the campus. And people started asking, well, I believe in all these things too. Why aren't I getting involved in this? Why am I not standing up for justice? So on December 2nd, we moved into Sproul Hall. We did expect to get arrested. We definitely expected to get arrested. And we were surprised because we sat there and we sat there and we sat there and nobody came. But around 3 in the morning, we got word that the police had massed and were going to come in. It was outrageous to the faculty that the students had been arrested and that the police had been brought on campus. So at that point, the faculty really started organizing and eventually came out with a strong statement of support for the students. What it did immediately was create a space in the Bay Area for the anti-Vietnam War protests. I think what it did nationally was it awakened students all over the country to a sense of themselves as political actors, that they could and should get involved in the major issues of the day.
The students who protested at Berkeley represented many different points of view, with everyone from young socialists to young Republicans joining the demonstrations and being carted off to jail. And as student leader Jack Weinberg pointed out, one of the most unique features of the Berkeley Student Revolt is that from its beginning to its climax, it was linked closely to the social and political issues and forces of the bigger society outside the campus. At every step, the threads ran plainly to every facet of the social system. There were overt roles played by big business, politicians, government leaders, labor, the press, etc. The idea that an educational institution could be operating from an agenda that was antithetical to free speech and, in fact, representative of an elite, repressive force gained further expression at Columbia University in 1968. As an Ivy League school, Columbia University is considered one of the hardest schools to get into. And this was also true back in 1968. So why would students, many of whom had dedicated most of their high school careers to building the kind of academic profile that would allow them to be accepted into Columbia, jeopardize it all by walking out of classes, demonstrating, and even taking over campus buildings? Again, as they had during the Children's Crusade and the Berkeley Free Speech Movement, the university stood up for their right to be heard, even if it meant that they might be expelled, jailed, or encounter violence. Then came Kent State, where the unthinkable happened.
Tear gas first started down the Commons, then the guard moved up on both sides of Taylor Hall and forced the kids off the Commons. Then one group, I don't know how many there were, 50 maybe, perhaps more, perhaps less, moved down into the practice football field.
After you feed them, then what will we do? Will you ask them to leave?
They've got grievances, they've got demands. There are demands on both sides. We have to talk.
And then there were a whole lot of kids around them. A few kids were throwing sticks and stones, but that was only a handful, not more than 10, 15. And then the guard shot some tear gas up on the hill to disperse the crowd, and the kids picked it up and threw it back.
You're right. Yep. Move up. A big circle around here. You don't talk during a state of emergency, Mike. Come on. Sorry. We'll talk as soon as we get this settled down. People shot on this campus. This is a citizen. Who wants people shot? All right, but they're sitting quiet. Okay, will you ask them to leave?
This area immediately. Leave this area immediately.
And all of a sudden I heard the shooting. And then I saw people dropping to the ground, and then I fell to the ground also, because I couldn't walk anymore.
What the investigators have to determine then is whether indeed there was a sniper and whether the guard was justified in firing his weapons, or whether, as some people here believe, the guard, under the pressure of a rock-throwing attack, panicked and fired its weapons indiscriminately, killing 4 people. Mike Pappas, CBS News, at Kent, Ohio.
The Greensboro Lunch Counter Protest, the Children's Crusade, the murders of Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Michael Schwerner, the Berkeley Free Speech Movement, the protests at Columbia University, and finally the killing of 4 students at Kent State. Today, those of us who are old enough to remember these protests are seeing a new generation of young people speaking out against racism, gun violence, political corruption, and environmental policies they believe are not only destroying our country, but our planet. These students don't believe they're too young to have an opinion, or that they should keep those opinions to themselves. So as they fight to bring about the changes they believe in, we hope they remember the thousands of students who walked before them, dreaming the same dreams.
No chance.